Hey guys, tonight we are going to travel way back before the Romans, before the Greeks, to the sun-baked cradle of civilization itself. You are about to open up shop in ancient Babylon, and your business isn't selling silks or spices, it's beer. But this isn't just a quaint historical tour. In your new profession, pouring a pint that's a little off, or charging a bit too much for it, isn't just bad for business, it could get you a 1-way ticket to the bottom of the Euphrates River, literally. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop your city and the current time in the comments below. It's a quiet thrill to see our little community scattered across the globe, all winding down together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The sun isn't up yet, but the air is already thick with the promise of heat. You're awake not because of a rooster, but because of a smell. It's the smell of your life, your trade, your entire world, the sweet, earthy, slightly tangy scent of fermenting grain. You are a tavern-keeper in the city of Babylon, and that smell is the smell of money, of survival, of another day on this fertile land between the two great rivers. You swing your legs off your simple reed mat, your feet landing on the cool, earth floor of your home, which is attached to the back of your tavern. The walls are thick mud-brick, a blessing that holds the night's coolness for a few precious hours against the coming onslaught of the sun. You stretch, your back cracking in the pre-dawn stillness. The only light is a sliver of grey seeping through the doorway, but you don't need light. Your body knows the geography of this space by heart. You shuffle into the main room of your tavern. It's small, and dominated by the tools of your trade. In one corner sits your heavy stone quern, two massive, flat stones used for grinding barley. In another, several large clay pots. Your GAKKUL sit like silent, pot-bellied gods. One is empty, waiting for today's batch. Another is sealed, its contents bubbling away in a slow, magical transformation. This is the heart of your operation, and it's where your day always begins. This is the central historical point of your new life. Beer in Mesopotamia was not a luxury beverage for weekend parties. It was a fundamental staple of the diet, a form of liquid bread. Laborers working on the great ziggurats received a daily ration of it. Priests used it in religious ceremonies. Kings drank it from golden cups. It was food, wages, and social lubricant all in one. And you are one of its humble creators. You run your hands through a basket of barley. The grains are coarse, dry. Your day's first task is to grind them. You kneel at the quern and begin the breaking work of pushing the top stone back and forth, crushing the barley into a coarse flour, or BAPPIR. The rhythmic grinding sound is the first heartbeat of your business day. Your arms ache, but it's a familiar, grounding ache. As you work, your mind is on the process. Is this barley as good as the last shipment from the farmer upriver? Did you let the last batch ferment for long enough? A batch that turns sour is more than a disappointment. It's a direct hit to your livelihood. Once the grinding is done, you mix the BAPPIR with water and herbs, forming it into small, hard cakes that you bake lightly. These are your bread loaves, the base of your brew. You break them up, mix them with more barley and hot water in one of the great clay pots, and let the mash sit. This sweet smelling porridge is the wort, the soul of the beer. You leave it to cool, trusting the wild yeasts in the air and on the clay to begin their work. And this process leads to a rather unique feature of your product, a weird little fact of Babylonian life. The beer you make is thick, unfiltered, and full of floating bits of grain and bread. It's more like a thin, alcoholic porridge than a clear, fizzy lager. Because of this, your customers don't just sip it from a cup. They drink it through long straws, often made of reeds, or, for the wealthier patrons, bronze. This allows them to drink the liquid from below the surface, bypassing the floating debris. A corner of your tavern has a collection of these straws ready for the day's business. For now, though, these are just distant thoughts. The sun is beginning to cast a golden glow over the city. Soon, your regulars will start to trickle in. Thirsty after a morning's work, you wipe the sweat from your brow, feeling a sense of pride in the process. You are a creator, a master of a fickle, living thing. You have water, you have grain, you have skill. In this moment, life feels simple and manageable. You have no idea that the king, in his great wisdom, is about to make your very simple life incredibly complicated. The sun climbs, and with it, the temperature inside your tavern. The earthy scent of fermenting mash now mingles with the sharp, almost dusty smell of the awakening city. The first of your regulars arrive, their faces etched with the fatigue of early labor. They are canal diggers and bricklayers, men whose thirst is earned through sweat and toil. They grunt their greetings, settle onto low clay benches, and wait for you to bring them their morning's sustenance. You fill simple clay beakers with the freshest brew and pass them out. This is your life's rhythm, the quiet creation in the dark, and the noisy distribution in the light. But today, you notice your barley supply is running low. The last delivery was smaller than promised. A common occurrence. It means you must make a trip to the communal storehouse near the city gate, a place of commerce, gossip, and endless haggling. You leave your wife to manage the tavern and step out into the street. The sun is a physical weight, the glare of the pale mud minus brick walls forcing you to squint. You join the river of people, a slow minus moving current of merchants, soldiers, and slaves. Your destination is a large, walled compound where farmers bring their goods. It's a place of constant motion, the air filled with the dust of threshed grain and the shouting of a dozen transactions happening at once. As you wait your turn to barter for a sack of barley, you overhear a conversation behind you. Two men, dressed in the fringed robes of junior scribes or temple administrators, are speaking in low, important tones. You, like most people in this city, cannot read the complex wedge minus shaped marks of cuneiform, but you can certainly listen. The king is determined. One says, his voice itself minus important whisper. He wants a law for all the land, from Sipar in the north to Ur in the south. One justice for the strong and the weak alike. A justice carved in stone. The other replies, his voice full of awe. Scribes have been working for months, gathering the old judgments, the laws of our fathers, but this will be different, firm on it. This is the central historical point of your day before your king. Hammurabi, law was a messy and inconsistent affair. If two men had a dispute, they might go to the local temple priests to arbitrate, or they might appeal to an elder, or rely on ancient, unwritten customs that varied from town to town. Justice was often personal, negotiable, and dependent on who you know. The idea of a single, comprehensive code of laws, written down and applied equally to everyone by the state, was a radical, revolutionary concept. You are living on the cusp of one of the great leaps forward in human governance. You shift the weight on your feet, pretending not to listen. You've heard talk like this before. Kings are always making grand pronouncements. It's what they do. It rarely has much to do with the price of barley or the thirst of a bricklayer. The first scribe scoffs. Permanent is one thing, but have you seen the list? The penalties are severe, an eye for an eye, quite literally. And this leads to a wonderfully niche detail about the world of these men. To become a scribe was an arduous process. It meant attending a special school, the Adubba or tablet house, from a young age. There, you would spend years learning the hundreds of cuneiform signs, practicing on wet clay tablets that would be wiped clean at the end of each day. The discipline was notoriously hard. A common Sumerian proverb reads, "He who would excel in the school of the scribes must rise with the dawn." These two men talking behind you belong to a tiny, literate elite. They are the software of the Babylonian Empire, the ones who make the entire complex machine a state run. Their knowledge is a form of power, and they know it. The second scribe lowers his voice even further. The question is, why? Is it truly for the widow and the orphan, as the proclamation will surely say? Or is it a monument, a way for Hammurabi to tell the gods, and all the kings who come after, that he was the great king of justice. Here, in the dusty courtyard of a granary, you have stumbled upon the very heart of a debate that historians and archaeologists still argue about thousands of years later. What was the primary purpose of the Code of Hammurabi? Was it a practical legal handbook, a genuine attempt at social reform meant to be consulted by judges across the land? Or was it a masterful piece of royal propaganda? An idealized statement of justice designed to legitimize Hammurabi's rule and secure his eternal legacy? Some scholars argue that its placement on public less proves it was for the people. Others point out that since most people couldn't read, the stele functioned more as a symbol of royal power than a legal resource. They argue it was a theoretical masterpiece, not a practical statute book. The whispers you are hearing suggest that even then, people suspected the king's motives might be as much about glory as about justice. But you have your barley now. You've haggled the price down to a few shekels of silver, which you weigh carefully on your small bronze balance. You hoist the heavy sack onto your shoulder, the scribes and their talk of kings and stones already fading from your mind. What does it matter to you? Your law is the law of fermentation. Your justice is a fair price for a good cup of beer. You turn and head back towards your tavern, confident that the grand ambitions of kings could never possibly interfere with the simple, honest business of serving a drink. Back in the familiar, beer-scented gloom of your tavern, you heave the sack of barley into the corner and wipe a layer of dust and sweat from your brow. The mid-morning crowd is thin, just a couple of regulars nursing their drinks in silence. Your wife nods at you from behind the counter, her presence a silent, reassuring anchor in your day. It's in this lull, this quiet moment between the morning rush and the midday meal, that your most unusual customer arrives. She doesn't enter with a clamor. The first thing you notice is the way the light from the doorway seems to change as she steps inside, casting a long shadow before her. She is a Nadi to you, a consecrated woman, a priestess in the service of the god Shamash, the sun god, who is also the god of justice. You know this instantly from her attire. She wears fine, clean linen, a rarity in this dusty city, and her hair is styled in a specific, elaborate way that marks her status. But the most striking thing is her shaved eyebrow, a visible sign of her sacred calling. She approaches the counter, her gaze sweeping across the room, taking in the clay benches, the stacked pots, the straws resting in a jar. Her expression is unreadable. You feel a prickle of anxiety. Her presence elevates the status of your establishment, but it also brings a level of scrutiny you're not used to. A complaint from a bricklayer is one thing. A complaint from a priestess of the sun god is another thing entirely. A beaker of your best, she says, her voice clear and steady. It's not a request, it's a calm command. You hastily pour a drink from your freshest batch, the one you brewed just a few days ago. You choose the cleanest clay beaker. You haven't passed it to her, making sure not to meet her eyes directly. And this is where we encounter a truly odd and specific detail of your world. While this priestess can conduct business like a man, her relationship with a place like yours is complicated. Taverns were seen as worldly, boisterous places, sometimes associated with vice and disorder. For a consecrated woman to be seen frequenting one could be a major social taboo. Her presence here is a calculated risk, a sign that she is either very confident in her reputation or here for a reason that outweighs the social impropriety. She doesn't drink immediately. She holds the beaker, her long fingers wrapped around the clay. The talk in the temple courtyard, she says, her voice low, is of the king's new laws, that he will carve them on a great stone for all to see, a stone blessed by Shamash himself. Her words echo what you heard from the scribes at the granary, but coming from her, they feel different, more real, more harmonious. The god of justice is taking a personal interest, and her very presence in your tavern fuels a long-standing historical debate about the true role of women in Mesopotamian society. For a long time, the prevailing view was that it was a thoroughly patriarchal world. Men were the heads of households, men held political power, and men dominated public life. Women were confined to the domestic sphere. She finally takes a long, slow drink through one of your reed straws. Her eyes closed for a moment as she savors the taste. You hold your breath. She lowers the straw and looks at you. "It is good," she says simply. Relief floods through you, so powerful it almost makes your knees weak. Keep your measures honest and your prices fair. Tavern-keeper. The eyes of Shemosh see everything, even in the darkest corners of a beer house. She places a small silver ring on the counter, more than enough to pay for the drink, and turns to leave. Her visit was brief, but it has changed the feeling in the room. Your little tavern, a simple place of drink and rest, suddenly feels connected to the grand, cosmic forces of gods and kings. The law is no longer a distant rumor. It has walked into your establishment, had a drink, and given you a warning. The priestess departs, leaving behind a silence that feels heavier than before she arrived. The small silver ring on the counter seems to hum with a faint energy, a tangible reminder of her presence. You quickly scoop it up and tuck it away. It's not just payment. It feels like a talisman, a ward against future trouble. Her words, "The eyes of Shemosh see everything," echo in your mind. You walk over to the large clay pot that holds your best, most recently fermented beer, the same batch the priestess just praised. You dip a small beaker in for yourself. It's a professional obligation, a form of quality control you perform every day. You raise the beaker to your lips, the familiar, slightly sour, yeasty smell filling your nostrils. You take a slow sip. The liquid is cool on your tongue, not refreshing in a modern, fizzy way, but deeply satisfying. The first taste is of the barley, a sweet, almost nutty flavor, like liquid bread. This is followed by a subtle bitterness from the herbs you mixed in, not hops, which haven't been discovered yet, but perhaps wild licorice, coriander, or fenugreek, added to balance the sweetness. Finally, there's the gentle warmth of the alcohol, a low minus level buzz that calms the nerves and soothes aching muscles. It's a good batch. The balance is right. This is the central, historical truth of your craft. Brewing in the ancient world was an art of approximation, a dance with chaos. You have no thermometers to control the temperature of the mash, no hydrometers to measure the sugar content, no understanding of microbiology. You only have your senses: sight, smell, taste, and the knowledge passed down from your father, who learned it from his. You know that a mash that is too hot will kill the magic. You know that a brew left open to the air for too long will turn sour, possessed by a bad spirit. Your entire business rests on your ability to read these subtle signs, to navigate the knife-edge between a perfect brew and a pot of undrinkable swill. As you savor the taste, you contemplate the what-ifs. What if you'd been distracted and let the mash get contaminated? What if the barley from the shifty farmer upriver had been moldy? The result would be a bad batch, and a bad batch presents a terrible dilemma. Do you throw it out, losing all the time, labor, and expensive grain you invested, or do you try to salvage it? And this is where we find a fascinatedly specific and slightly disgusting detail about ancient cost minus saving measures. If a batch of beer was slightly sour or off, a less minus than minus scrupulous tavern-keeper might try to mask the flavor. They might add a large amount of date honey to overwhelm the soreness with sweetness. Or, more cunningly, they might mix in a small amount of ash. The alkalinity of the ash would neutralize some of the acidity, chemically correcting the flavor, at least temporarily. It was a dishonest and desperate trick, a way to sell a flawed product without having to dump it in the gutter. But it was a trick that a trained palate, like that of a priestess, would likely detect. The quality and nature of this beer is a subject of ongoing experimental archaeology, which forms our academic debate for the chapter. We can read the cuneiform tablets that list the ingredients for different types of beer: dark beer, sweet beer, strong beer. We even have residue analysis from ancient pottery. But what did it actually taste like? How alcoholic was it? Historians and brewers have been trying for years to recreate Mesopotamian beer based on these clues. Some argue that it was a thick, low-minus alcohol grog, more of a nutritional supplement than an intoxicating beverage. They believe the wild yeasts would have produced a brew with an alcohol content similar to modern kombucha, around to full by 5%. Others argue that with the right techniques, using concentrated date syrup to boost the sugar content. For example, Mesopotamian brewers could have easily produced strong beers of 8%, 5% or even higher, rivaling a modern craft ale. The debate is a fun one, because the only way to test the hypothesis is to try and brew it yourself. Was the drink you're sipping a mild, porridge minus-like beverage, or a potent, intoxicating brew capable of causing some serious trouble in your tavern? Without a time-traveling tasting team, the argument will likely continue. You take another sip. This batch is good. It's honest. You have nothing to fear from the eyes of Shamash today. But the priestess's warning has planted a seed of anxiety in your mind. Keep your measures honest and your prices fair. It's what you always try to do. But what if someone disagrees? What if a customer, drunken belligerent, claims you short minus poured his beaker? What if a rival tavern minus keeper accuses you of watering down your product to undercut his prices? Before today, such a dispute would be a messy affair of shouting, witnesses, and appeals to the local elders. But the whispers of the scribes and the words of the priestess point to something new. A single law, a single justice, carved in stone. You look at the large, bubbling pot of fermenting beer, and for the first time, you feel a flicker of fear. In your business, where taste is subjective and quality can vary from day to day, a permanent black minus and minus white law seems like a very dangerous thing indeed. A few weeks pass. The priestess's visit fades into the rhythm of daily life, becoming just another story to tell. The memory of the scribe's whispers softens into the background noise of the city. Your days return to their familiar shape, grinding barley in the cool dark of morning, serving the thirsty laborers as the sun climbs, haggling for supplies in the dusty marketplaces, and cleaning up as twilight paints the ziggurat in shades of orange and purple. Then, one afternoon, the rhythm is broken. A commotion from the street draws you to the door of your tavern. It's not the usual noise of arguing merchants or laughing children. It's a focused, purposeful sound, the rhythmic chanting of laborers, the grinding of heavy stone on wood, and the sharp commands of an overseer. You, along with your neighbors, the potter, the weaver, the baker, all poke your heads out to see. A massive flatbed car, pulled by 4 straining oxen and pushed by a dozen sweating men, is inching its way down your street. On the cart lies a single, colossal slab of black stone. It's taller than 2 men, dark, polished, and shaped like a huge, tapered finger pointing at the sky. It glitters in the sun, a slash of midnight against the pale brown of the mud-minus brick city. It feels alien, ancient, futuristic at the same time. The crowd parts before it, people shuffling back to press themselves against the walls, their faces a mixture of awe and apprehension. This is it, the stone the scribes whispered about. This is the central, historical moment your city has been waiting for. This is a stele, a monumental stone pillar, and it is about to become the most important object in your world. The sheer effort involved in quarrying the single piece of diorite hard, black volcanic rock, transporting it hundreds of miles downriver, and erecting it is a staggering display of the king's power. It is a statement before a single word is even read. It says, I am a king who can move mountains and bend the very rock of the earth to my will. The procession continues, moving slowly towards the city's sacred center, the temple district where the priestess lived. You know, instinctively, that this is where it will be erected, in the public courtyard, in the shadow of the temple of Marduk, the patron god of Babylon. It will be a piece of civic infrastructure, as permanent and as unmovable as the city walls themselves. Over the next few days, the talk in your tavern is of nothing else. No one you know can read the dense, intricate script that covers the stone, but everyone has a theory. It's a record of the king's victories, says one man, a veteran of Hammurabi's wars, a list of all the cities he has conquered and the tribute they owe. No, insists a merchant, it's a list of prices, a decree from the king on how much a man can charge for wool, or oil, or barley, to stop the gougeress and profiteers. And this brings us to a wonderfully human detail about life in a world without mass media. Information traveled through rumor, speculation, and third-hand accounts. The erection of the stele was like the launch of a mysterious new government website that nobody had the password for. The content was a blank slate onto which people projected their greatest hopes and fears. For the debtor, it was a promise of relief. For the merchant, a threat of regulation. For the victim of a crime, the hope of retribution. For you, the tavern-keeper, it's a source of deep unease. The stone's very existence, and its more than 280 individual laws, is at the heart of a major scholarly debate. Why this? Why now? What was happening in Babylonian society that made such a comprehensive public declaration of law necessary? One school of thought argues that it was a response to a period of rapid social and economic change. Hammurabi had recently conquered a large empire, unifying a collection of previously independent city-states. This created a more complex, mobile, and anonymous society. The old, informal systems of justice that worked in small, tight-knit communities were no longer sufficient. You might be doing business with a merchant from a city you'd never seen, whose customs were different from yours. The code, then this view, was a necessary piece of social technology, an operating system for a newly complex empire, designed to create a predictable, stable environment for commerce and social interaction. A different theory suggests the motivation was more political. It argues that Hammurabi, as a conqueror, needed to impose his authority and legitimize his rule over the newly subjugated cities by presenting himself as the king of justice, receiving the laws directly from the sun god Shamash as depicted in the carving at the top of the stele. He was framing his rule not as an act of naked military power, but as a divinely ordained mission to bring order and righteousness to the land. The code, in this light, was a brilliant piece of political branding, a way to unify his new empire under a single, divinely sanctioned legal and ideological framework. You, of course, know nothing of these grand historical theories. You only know that a great and terrible stone now stands in the heart of your city. It is silent, but you feel like it's watching you. Every cup of beer you pour, every transaction you make, now happens in the shadow of that stone. You feel a growing need to know exactly what it says. You don't want to rely on the rumors of your patrons anymore. You need to find someone who can read the stone and tell you the truth. And you have a frightening suspicion that the truth is not going to be good for business. The anxiety gnaws at you. The great black stele in the temple courtyard has become a silent, ominous character in the story of your life. The tavern chatter is endless, but it's all speculation, a fog of rumor that only makes you more nervous. You need clarity. You need facts. You need to know what the king's law says about you. There's only one way to do that. You must find someone who can read. This is a bigger challenge than it sounds. Literacy is a rare and powerful skill, a form of magic possessed by priests, scribes, and high-minors ranking officials. To ask one of them for help is to admit your own ignorance and to expose yourself to their authority. After days of deliberation, you decide to approach a low-level clerk you know, a man who works in the city's administration, recording tax revenues and land deeds. You've served him beer for years. You know his wife's name. You hope this personal connection will be enough. One afternoon, when he is sitting alone in your tavern, you gather your courage. You place a beaker of your best beer in front of him. On the house, he raises an eyebrow. You lean in, your voice low. I hear you can read the king's new stone. Thy mind is sure. He takes a slow sip, savoring the free drink and the power it represents. I can, he says, his eyes gleaming with self-importance. I have studied the copy on the clay tablets in the archive. There is talk, you say, trying to sound casual, that the king has something to say about men like me, about tavern-keepers. The clerk smiles, a thin, knowing smile that makes you deeply uncomfortable. Though, yes, he says, clearly enjoying this moment. The great King Hammurabi, blessed by the gods, has thought of everyone. He has several things to say about you. Let me see. I believe it is law number 108. He closes his eyes for a moment, as if accessing a scroll in his mind. Then he begins to recite, his voice taking on a formal, declamatory tone. This is the moment The fog of rumor is about to be burned away by the hard, clear light of the law. This recitation is the central point of this entire chapter. The moment when the abstract concept of law becomes a concrete, personal, and terrifying reality for you. If a tavern-keeper, he begins, does not accept grain according to gross weight in payment of drink, but takes money, and the price of the drink is less than the price of the grain, she shall be convicted and thrown into the water. You stare at him, your mouth suddenly dry. You try to unravel the dense, legalistic language. He is talking about price gouging. If you charge more for the beer than the value of the grain used to make it, the penalty is death by drowning. It's a shocking, brutal piece of consumer protection law. There is no fine. There is no warning. There is only the river. The clerk isn't finished. He takes another sip of beer. As if to punctuate the drama, it continues. Law 109: if conspirators meet in the house of a tavern-keeper, and she does not capture them and bring them to the palace, that tavern-keeper shall be put to death. Your heart pounds in your chest. Suddenly, your tavern doesn't feel like a cozy refuge. It feels like a trap. Every conversation that happens within these walls is now your responsibility. The two merchants muttering about a deal gone bad in the corner. Are they conspirators? The group of off-duty soldiers complaining about their commander. Is that a conspiracy? The law is vague. Its definition terrifyingly broad. You are now expected to be a spy for the state, and the penalty for failure is death. This is where we encounter a very specific and quirky detail of the code. Why this focus on female tavern-keepers? The law uses the feminine form. This is a direct reflection of the fact that brewing and tavern-keeping were so frequently the domain of women. But it also raises a question. Was the law singling them out? Was it a reflection of a societal suspicion towards these independent businesswomen? As we discussed before, it's a subtle but significant detail. The law is not just regulating a business. It's regulating a specific type of person. And this leads to one of the most fundamental debates about the Code of Hammurabi. Was it truly a code of justice? Or was it a code of order? The distinction is crucial. A code of justice is primarily concerned with fairness, with righting wrongs, with moral principles. A code of order is primarily concerned with stability, with maintaining the existing social hierarchy, and with the smooth functioning of the state. The laws you've just heard seem to lean heavily towards the order side of the argument. The penalty for price gouging isn't to refund the customer. It's to eliminate the disruptive element from society. The penalty for failing to report conspirators isn't a fine. It's to eliminate a potential threat to the state's security. Scholars who support this view argue that the code's primary goal was not to create a fair and equitable society in the modern sense, but to create a stable and predictable one where the authority of the king and the state was absolute. It was a tool of social control, using terror as its primary enforcement mechanism. The clerk finishes his beer and stands up to leave, facing the empty beaker on the counter with a soft click that sounds as loud as a thunderclap in the silent room. So, you see, he says with that same thin smile, the king has taken a great interest in your profession. I'd be careful, if I were you. He walks out, leaving you standing alone in your tavern. The familiar, comforting scent of brewing beer now smells like danger. The low murmur of your customers now sounds like conspiracy. The great black stone in the center of the city is no longer an abstract symbol of power. It's a personal threat, and its most chilling instruction has already been made clear if you make a mistake. The river is waiting. The clerk's words hang in the air long after he's gone, thick and heavy like the humidity before a storm, thrown into the water. The phrase repeats in your mind, a chilling, rhythmic chant. It's an abstract threat, a story told by an arrogant official. It's easy to dismiss as hyperbole, the kind of thing kings say to scare people. You try to push it away, to focus on the familiar tasks of wiping the counter, of checking the mash, but the fear has taken root. A few days later, you see what the law looks like when it crawls off the stone and into the real world. It happens in the middle of the afternoon. A commotion erupts from a few streets over, near the Weavers' district. It's not the usual sound of a street brawl. It's a more organized, Official sound the sharp shouts of the palace garden, the high minor-pitched wailing of a woman. A crowd gathers instantly, and you, drawn by a morbid curiosity you can't suppress, join them. You push your way through the throng of bodies until you can see the source of the noise. There, in the center of a tense circle, are two palace guards. They are holding a man you recognize. His name is Iou-Bonny, and he runs a small, dusty tavern just like yours. A few blocks away, he is a rival, but a friendly one. You've traded barley with him when supplies were low, and you've complained together about the rising price of charcoal. Now, he is on his knees in the dirt, his face pale with terror. His wife is the one wailing, held back by another guard. Standing before Iou-Bonny is a redam, a kind of royal officer or soldier responsible for enforcing the king's will. He holds a small clay tablet in his hand. He is not shouting. His voice is calm, matter minus of minus fe, which somehow makes it all the more terrifying. He is addressing the crowd as much as he is addressing the condemned man. Iou-Bonny, tavern-keeper, the officer proclaims, his voice cutting through the woman's cries. You have been accused by 3 witnesses of selling watered beer for the price of pure beer. You have violated the king's law. You have stolen from your neighbors and dishonored the city. This is the central historical point of the scene unfolding before you. The law is being enacted publicly as a form of theater. The punishment of one is a lesson for all. This isn't about quietly removing a criminal from the streets. It's about demonstrating the power and reach of the state in the most visible way imaginable. It's a state-sponsored performance of justice, and everyone in the crowd is a mandatory member of the audience. The officer gestures, and the 2 guards haul Iou-Bonny to his feet. They begin to drag him towards the riverbank, which is only a short distance away. The crowd follows, a silent, shuffling procession. You follow too, your feet moving as if of their own accord. You feel sick, but you can't look away. This is where you witness a very specific and brutal interpretation of the law. The clerk had told you the penalty for price gouging was being thrown into the water. But what did that actually mean? Here, you see it firsthand. It wasn't just about being tossed in to see if you could swim. At the river's edge, one of the guards produces a heavy second length of rope. They tie Iou-Bonny's hands and feet. They force him into the sand. It is a swift, efficient, practiced procedure. They are not just throwing him into the water. They are ensuring the water keeps in. This scene feeds directly into a long standing academic debate about the code. How literally was it applied? Was the eye for an eye principle a strict rule of retaliation, or was it a form of legal metaphor? A statement of value where the loss of an eye could be compensated with a large sum of silver? Similarly, were the brutal death penalties prescribed for so many offenses actually carried out, or were they maximum sentences, a form of scared straight tactic, with lesser punishments or fines being the more common outcome? The evidence is mixed. Legal documents from the period show many disputes being settled with fines. However, the very existence of a scene like the one you are witnessing suggests that for certain crimes, especially those seen as direct affronts to the king's new order, the state was more than willing to apply the letter of the law in its most brutal form. Some historians argue that these public, ritualistic executions were a key part of consolidating state power, a form of state terror designed to quell dissent and enforce compliance. In the newly conquered territories of Hammurabi's empire, what you're seeing isn't just the punishment of a crime, it's a political act. The guards swing the heavy sack back and forth 3 times. On the 3rd swing, they heave it out over the murky, brown water of the Euphrates. It lands with a heavy, sickening splash, disappears for a moment, and then bobs back to the surface, a shapeless, struggling lump, but only for a moment. It slowly sinks beneath the currents, leaving behind nothing but a few spreading ripples. The crowd is dead silent. The only sound is the gut-wrenching grief of Iou-Bonny's wife. You stand there, frozen, the sun beating down on your head. The law is no longer a rumor or a recitation. It is a wet sack sinking in a brown river. It is the face of your friend, pale with terror. It is the sound of a woman's scream. You turn away, your stomach churning, and stumble back towards your tavern. Every pot of beer, every measure you pour, now feels impossibly heavy. You stumble back into your tavern, but the familiar space offers no comfort. The smell of fermenting barley, once a scent of life and commerce, now seems cloying and funereal. You see the ghost of Yale minus Bonnie everywhere in the corner where a customer sits. In the shadow cast by a clay pot, the image of the sack hitting the water is burned into your mind. The brutal finality of it has shaken you to your core. His crime wasn't murder, it wasn't treason. It was, at its heart, a business dispute. He was accused of selling a subpar product, and the punishment was not a fine, not a public shaming, but complete eradication. This is the new reality that you are struggling to process. The state has inserted itself into the relationship between you and your customers in the most terrifying way imaginable. This brings you face to face with the core philosophy of Hammurabi's Code, the principle that the scribes whispered about and that you have now seen in action. This is our central historical point for the chapter. The principle of relaxation is the law of retaliation, and its most famous formulation. From other parts of the code, it is expressed as an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. This principle states that the punishment should correspond in kind and degree to the injury. It is a form of retributive justice, where the goal is not rehabilitation or compensation, but a symmetrical restoration of a broken balance. You try to make sense of it. If a man knocks out another man's tooth, the state will knock out his. It's a simple, brutal, and strangely logical equation. But how did that logic apply to Yale minus Bonnie? He didn't drown anyone. He sold watery beer, as use it there, trying to connect the crime to the punishment. A chilling interpretation begins to dawn on you. Perhaps the logic was symbolic. By watering down his beer, he was, in a sense, drowning its quality, its essence. He was cheating the lifeblood of the community, the grain, the water, the labor with a worthless imitation. And so, the river, the source of life minus giving water that he had misused, became the instrument of his own death. The symmetry is poetic and utterly terrifying. You begin to think about the other laws you've heard rumored. If a son strikes his father, the code supposedly says the son's hands shall be cut off. The logic is direct. The hands that performed the impious act are destroyed. It is a justice that operates on the body itself, marking the crime onto the flesh of the criminal. And this brings us to a weird and fascinatedly specific application of this principle found elsewhere in the code. It concerns the crime of false accusation. Law number 1 of the code states if anyone accuse another of a capital crime, but cannot prove it, he who accused him shall be put to death. This is the other side of the coin. The state will protect you from criminals, but it will also protect you from those who would use the law as a weapon. If a rival tavern-keeper were to falsely accuse you of watering your beer in order to get rid of the competition, and he couldn't produce the witnesses to prove it, he would be the one facing the river. It's a powerful deterrent against frivolous lawsuits, a self-regulating mechanism built into the system. The law of retaliation cuts both ways. But how just was this eye for an eye system? Really? This is the center of a major, ongoing debate among legal historians and dasyreologists. On the surface, relaxation seems like a primitive and barbaric form of justice, but many scholars argue that, in its historical context, it was actually a major step forward. The argument is that before this, justice was often based on the blood feud. If a man from one family killed a man from another, the victim's family would retaliate, often killing the murderer, or perhaps one of his brothers, or his son. This could spiral into endless cycles of vendetta and violence, destabilizing the entire community. The Code of Hammurabi takes justice out of the hands of the family and puts it into the hands of the state. It says, "You will not take your own revenge. We, the state, will do it for you, and we will do it in a way that is proportional and final." Furthermore, it limits the punishment. You can take an eye for an eye, but not two. You can't wipe out the offender's entire family. In this light, relaxation was not about promoting violence, but about containing and controlling it. It was a brutal form of peacemaking. Other historians, however, argue that this interpretation is too generous. They point out that the eye for an eye principle only applied to men of the same social class. For example, law number 198 states that if a man of the patrician class puts out the eye of a commoner, he doesn't lose his own eye. He simply pays a fine of 1 mina of silver. The law was not blind. It saw class distinctions very clearly. The principle of retaliation was bent to uphold the existing social hierarchy. Justice was symmetrical, but only among equals. You are a commoner. Your customers are commoners. ILU minus Bonnie was a commoner. In your world, the brutal logic of retaliation holds. You look around your tavern, at the clay pots, at the worn wooden counter. You now see everything through this new lens of symmetrical justice. Every object, every action, seems to have a terrifying, corresponding reaction. If you serve a bad drink, the river will serve you death. The world, which once felt messy and negotiable, now feels sharp, rigid, and brutally clear. The execution of ILU minus Bonnie has changed the mood in your neighborhood. A quiet fear has settled over the local businesses. The baker down the street eyes his scales with a new nervousness. The weaver checks his measurements with a paranoid precision. The shadow of the stele, once a distant abstraction, now falls directly across your own doorway. Your mind, now conditioned to see the world through the terrifying logic of Lex T. Lion, starts to wonder if the state is willing to enforce such a brutal punishment for something as subjective as the quality of beer. What other hidden dangers lurk in the mundane details of your life? Your gaze drifts upwards, to the ceiling of your tavern. You look at the large, rough-hewn palm log that serves as the main roof beam, its surface cracked and dry from 100 years of Mesopotamian sun, and a new, cold dread begins to creep in. You remember another rumor you heard, another fragment of the king's new law, whispered about by a builder who was drinking in your tavern last week. He was complaining about the impossible standards the palace architects were now demanding. This brings us to the main historical point of this chapter. The Code of Hammurabi was not just concerned with crimes like theft or assault. It was a comprehensive legal framework that regulated commercial activity, contracts, and professional liability to an astonishing degree. And no profession was held to a higher, or more terrifying, standard than that of a house builder. You try to recall the builder's exact words. It was something about what happens if a house collapses. You find yourself thinking about your own establishment. The tavern is old. The mud minus brick walls are thick. But you know they settle and shift over time. That main roof beam, is it truly sound? What if, during a busy night, with the room full of patrons, it were to give way? This fear leads you to one of the most infamous and starkly illustrative laws in the entire Code Law 229. Though you don't know its number, you know its terrifying substance. It states if a builder builds a house for someone and does not construct it properly, and the house which he built falls in and causes the death of the owner, then that builder shall be put to death. This is the grim logic of retaliation applied to professional malpractice. The builder's carelessness caused a death, so he must pay with his own life. The symmetry is clear, but the law doesn't stop there. It gets more specific, more personal, and infinitely more cruel. This is our weird, and frankly horrifying, detail of the chapter. Law 230 continues, if it causes the death of the owner's son, then they shall put the builder's son to death. Think about that for a second. The principle of an eye for an eye is twisted into a son for a son. It is a justice that is not visited upon the perpetrator himself, but upon his family, upon the person he holds most dear. It is a form of emotional and psychological retaliation that goes far beyond simple physical retribution. It is designed to make the builder feel the exact same, uniquely painful loss that his client feels. It's a level of calculated cruelty that reveals the chillingly creative ways the Babylonian state could inflict pain. This very law is at the center of a profound ethical and historical debate. How could a society that was so advanced in so many ways in astronomy, in mathematics, in literature embrace a concept of justice that seemed so barbaric to modernize? Some scholars argue that we are committing the sin of presentism, judging the past by the moral standards of the present. They contend that, in the context of ancient Mesopotamia, the concept of the individual was less important than the concept of the family or the clan. A family was a single corporate entity. A debt owed by the father was a debt owed by the son. A crime committed by the father brought shame upon the entire household. In this worldview, punishing the son for the father's crime, while cruel, was not seen as illogical. It was a transaction between two corporate entities, the builder's family and the owner's family. Other historians argue that this is letting the Babylonians off the hook too easily. They see laws like this as evidence of a deeply ingrained cruelty and a disregard for what we would consider basic human rights. They argue that this was not about abstract legal theory. It was a very real to love terror designed to ensure that the king's building projects, the temples, the palaces, the canals were built to the highest possible standard. It incentivized quality control through the most extreme form of emotional blackmail. The question remains, was a son for a son a logical extension of a different cultural worldview, or was it a monstrous aberration, a sign of a fundamental cruelty at the heart of the system? You stare up at the roof beam, a cold sweat on your back. You are not a builder, but you are a property owner. Who built this tavern a century ago? His family line is long gone. But what about you? What if a loose brick falls from your wall and injures a customer? What is the penalty for that? Does the law hold you, the current owner, responsible for the state of the building? The web of liability feels impossibly complex and frighteningly vast. Your world, which used to be contained within the walls of your business, now seems to extend outwards to your suppliers and backwards in time to the long-minus dead men who first laid these bricks. The fear is no longer just about the quality of your beer. It's about the very integrity of the walls around you, the roof above your head, and it pushes you to consider the ultimate legal recourse. The terrifying last resort for winter parties simply cannot agree the judgment of the river god himself. The fear is a physical presence now, a permanent resident in your tavern. It sits with you as you grind your barley and watches as you serve your customers. First, it was the fear of your product, then the fear of your building. Now, deeper, more existential fear begins to form, a fear of the legal process itself. You've seen what happens when the state decides you are guilty. But what happens when they are not sure? What happens when it's your word against another's, with no clear evidence, no reliable witnesses? In your old world, it would have been a shouting match, an appeal to the elders, an unsatisfactory stalemate. In Hammurabi's new world, you learn there is a final, terrifying arbiter of the river. You learn about it from a hushed conversation between two patrons. One of them, a fisherman, claims to have seen it happen just after dawn. A woman from the weaver's quarter had been accused of sorcery, of casting a curse that made her neighbor's child sick. It's a classic case of he said, she said. There is no physical proof, only suspicion and bad blood. And for a crime like sorcery, a crime that leaves no visible trace, the code has a special provision. This is the main historical point for this chapter for certain types of accusations where human judgment was deemed insufficient. The Babylonians turned to a process called a river ordeal. It was not a punishment, but a method of divine arbitration. The river itself, personified as a river god, was asked to deliver the verdict. It was the ultimate appeals court, a way of taking the messy business of judgment out of human hands and giving it directly to the gods. The fisherman describes the scene. The accused woman was brought to the banks of the Euphrates, not by palace guards, but by priests. Her accuser stood on the bank, loudly repeating his charge. The priest recited a prayer, asking the river god to seize the guilty and let the innocent go free. Then, the woman was made to enter the water, and this is where we find a specific, and frankly bizarre, detail about the ordeal. The goal wasn't to drown the person as a form of execution, as had happened to Yale. The goal was to see what the river god decided. According to law of Hammurabi's code, if anyone bring an accusation of sorcery against another, the accused shall go to the river and leap into the river. If the river proves his master and he is drowned, his accuser shall take possession of his house. But if the river proves that the accused is not guilty, and he escapes unhurt, then he who had brought the accusation shall be put to death, while he who leapt into the river shall take possession of the house that had belonged to his accuser. This is a high minus stakes, all minus or minus nothing form of litigation. The outcome is not just life or death for the accused. It is life or death for the accuser as well. The fisherman reported that the woman, buoyed by her clothes or perhaps by a quirk of the current, did not sing. She struggled, wailed, but was eventually able to make her way back to the muddy bank, sputtering and terrified, but alive. She had been proven innocent by the god. The priests declared it so. A grim silence then fell over the crowd as all eyes turned to her accuser, who now faced the death penalty for his false accusation. The logic of the river ordeal is the subject of intense debate among historians and anthropologists. On the surface, it looks like a superstitious and random way to determine guilt. But was it really? One theory argues that it was a sophisticated form of psychological test. The ordeal was so terrifying that a person who knew they were guilty might refuse to undergo it, which would be taken as a confession. Or their fear and guilt might cause them to panic and flail in the water, increasing their chances of drowning. Conversely, a person who truly believed in their own innocence might enter the water with more calmness and confidence, increasing their chances of survival. In this view, the ordeal wasn't really about the god's judgment. It was about using the belief in a god's judgment to elicit a truthful response. Another, more cynical theory suggests that the outcome could be manipulated. A priest or official could subtly advise the accused on the safest place to enter the river, where the currents were weaker. Or they could have a boat waiting just out of sight to rescue a person they wanted to see exonerated. Conversely, they could ensure a guilty verdict by pushing the person into a fast minus moving channel. This would make the river ordeal not a test of guilt, but a tool for the elite to enforce their will under the guise of divine judgment. We have no direct proof of this, but given the stakes, it's a compelling possibility. Was the river a divine judge, a psychological test, or a corruptible to love power? The academic jury is still out. You sit in your tavern, the fisherman's story, painting a vivid picture in your mind. The river, which you have always seen as a source of life, of water for your beer, of fish for your table, of transport for your grain, now has a new and terrifying identity. It is the ultimate judge. You think about the accusations that could be leveled at you. His beer is water. He harbors conspirators. His prices are unfair. These are accusations that are hard to definitively prove or disprove with human evidence. The thought is paralyzing. If your rival across the street were to accuse you, and the court could not decide, would your fate be handed over to the river god? Would you be forced to leap into those murky brown currents, with your entire life and the life of your accuser hanging on the whim of the water? It is a terrifying thought. The law, you realize, is not just written on stone. It is written in the water, too. The shadow of the river ordeal lingers in your mind for days. The world now seems to be governed by a set of invisible, high-minus-stakes rules that you are only just beginning to understand. You find yourself becoming more cautious. No watchful. You scrutinize new customers, wondering if they are honest patrons or potential accusers. You listen to the conversations in your tavern not with the casual ear of a host, but with the nervous attention of a man who could be held responsible for every muttered complaint. But this time, your reaction is completely different. The first time she visited, you felt a mixture of own anxiety, honored by her presence but nervous about her judgment. Now, your primary emotion is pure, unadulterated fear. Her presence is no longer a compliment. It is a liability. You remember the law the clerk recited, the one about conspirators, but another, even more specific law now flashes in your mind. A piece of tavern gossip you'd heard from a traveling merchant. This brings us to our main historical point for this chapter. Hammurabi's code was deeply concerned with maintaining social order and hierarchy, and this extended to regulating who could go where. The law recognized that certain people belonged in certain places, and it was the duty of proprietors like you to enforce these divisions. The priestess steps inside, her eyes adjusting to the gloom. She gives you a slight nod of recognition, but before she can speak, you move to intercept her. You bow your head respectfully, but you place yourself between her and the main room of the tavern. "My lady," you say, your voice slow and hopefully steady. "Forgive me. Your presence honors my humble establishment, but I cannot serve you." She stops, her expression hardening almost imperceptibly. "And why is that, tavern-keeper?" You swallow hard. This is a dangerous moment. You are a commoner telling a powerful, high-status woman that she cannot enter your establishment. You are risking her wrath, which could bring you a world of trouble, but you fear the king's wrath more. You lean closer, your voice barely a whisper. "The king's stone, my lady. Law 110. The penalty is horrific death by burning. And while the law is directed at her, you know instinctively that you, the tavern-keeper who allowed her to enter and drink, would not escape punishment. At the very least, your business would be ruined, your reputation shattered. You would be the man who facilitated a holy woman's capital crime." The priestess stares at you, her dark eyes searching your face. You are seeing a fascinating undebated aspect of Babylonian society in action. Why would such a law exist? Why would it be forbidden for a holy woman, a powerful economic actor, to enter a public house for a drink? One theory is that it was about protecting their ritual purity. Taverns were seen as profane, worldly spaces, full of revto, potential violence, and general disorder. For a woman consecrated to a god, to be in such a place was to be spiritual or be contaminated. The law, in this view, was a form of religious protection, preserving the sanctity of the priesthood. The most debated question is, was this law actually enforced? Is it possible that it was one of the many ideal laws on the stele, a statement of moral principle that was quietly ignored in practice, especially when the priestess in question was a wealthy and influential one? Or was the threat of being burned alive a real endeavor minus present danger for women like her? Historians look for court records documenting such a case, but the evidence is scarce. This leaves us in a state of uncertainty. Was your refusal an act of genuine, life minus saving caution, or an overly literal interpretation of a law that was rarely invoked? The priestess holds your gaze for a long moment. You can see a flicker of understanding and perhaps a trace of grudging respect in her eyes. You are not just being insolent. You are trying to protect both of you from a law that is absolute and merciless. You have reminded her of a rule that she, in her power and status, might have felt she could ignore. Without another word, she turns and steps back out into the blinding sunlight, disappearing as quickly as she came. You let out a breath you didn't realize you were holding. You have successfully navigated a perilous social and legal minefield. You had offended a powerful woman to obey an even more powerful king. You turn back to your customers, your heart still hammering. Your little tavern has become a gatehouse, and you are its unwilling gatekeeper, forced to decide who can and cannot pass, with life and death as the potential stakes. The encounter with the priestess leaves you shaken. You feel as though you just navigated a narrow channel full of hidden rocks, and while you've made it through, the sense of constant peril remains. You have become a gatekeeper of social order, a rule you never asked for, but the law, you are learning, has a way of inserting itself into every corner of your life. The next corner it turns is the simple, age-old problem of the unpaid tab. An old regular, a man named Sin-L-EQI, has been coming to your tavern every day for weeks. He's a potter by trade, a man whose hands are perpetually covered in a fine layer of clay dust. He is a good man, but a sad one, his shoulders stooped by some private grief you don't ask about. He drinks quietly, pays when he can, and promises to pay the rest when he sells his next batch of pots. You have been patient with him. In the old days, before the stele, this was a matter of personal trust, a flexible arrangement between neighbors. But Sin-L-EQI's debt has grown. It's no longer a trivial amount. It's several shekels of silver, the equivalent of a month's worth of beer. Your wife has started giving you pointed looks every time he comes in. The sack of barley in the corner is a constant reminder that your business has costs, and trust doesn't pay the grain merchant. You realize you can't let this continue. You must confront him. And to do that, you need to understand what the King's Law says about debt. This brings you to another major section of Hammurabi's code. Our central historical point for this chapter, its incredibly detailed regulations concerning loans, interest, and debt. The code wasn't just about crime and punishment. It was a sophisticated manual for a credit-minus-based economy. It recognized that commerce relied on loans, and it sought to regulate them to ensure fairness and prevent the system from collapsing under the weight of bad debt. You once again seek out your acquaintance, the clerk T-Shah, plying him with another free beaker of beer in exchange for his knowledge. This time, he is less theatrical, more business-like. Debt, he says, swirling the beer in his cup. The king has much to say on debt. First, the interest rate. It is fixed by the stone itself. For a loan of grain, the maximum interest is 1 minus third of the principal. For a loan of silver, it is 1 minus fifth. Any creditor who charges more is a usurer, and his debt is void. This is a revolutionary concept, a state-minus mandated cap on interest rates. It is designed to protect debtors like sin-L, DQI from predatory lenders who would charge ruinous rates that could never be repaid. But what if he cannot pay? You ask. The principal or the interest. He has no silver. The clerk's eyes narrow. Then the law is clear. The creditor can seize the debtor's property, his tools, his donkey, his grain. If he has no property, the creditor can seize the man himself, or his wife, or his children, to work off the debt. This is debt slavery, a common and accepted practice in the ancient world. But, the clerk adds, holding up a finger, the King's Law offers protection. Law 117. The debt's slave can only be held for 3 years. In the 4th year, they must be set free. This 3-year limit is a fascinating and specific detail of the code. It's a form of bankruptcy protection, an escape clause. It ensures that debt, while a serious matter, would not necessarily condemn a family to slavery for eternity. It provided a light at the end of a very dark tunnel, a way for a family to eventually regain its freedom and start over. But the complexity of these laws, and the harsh reality of debt slavery, fuels a major historical debate. Was the Code of Hammurabi a progressive piece of social legislation designed to protect the poor and vulnerable? Or was it a conservative document designed to protect the interests of the wealthy creditor class? The argument for it being a progressive code points to laws like the cap on interest rates and the 3-year limit on debt slavery. These were genuine protections that did not exist in many other ancient societies. It suggests that Hammurabi, or at least his legal advisors, had a real concern for social justice and preventing the widespread destitution of the peasant class, which formed the backbone of the economy and the army. The counter-minus argument is that these protections were minimal and that the overall thrust of the code was to uphold the rights of property owners and creditors. The very fact that a creditor could seize a man's children to pay for a debt is, to modern eyes, abhorrent. This view argues that the code's main purpose was to ensure the stability of the credit system upon which the wealthy elite depended. The small protections offered to debtors were not a matter of compassion, but a pragmatic calculation to prevent the kind of widespread social unrest that could threaten the state. Was the law a shield for the weak, or a cage built by the strong? The debate continues. You thank the clerk, your mind reeling. The law provides a path, but it is a harsh one. You look over at sin-Leqi, sitting in the corner, staring into his empty cup. You don't want to take his potter's wheel. You certainly don't want to take his son, but the law says you have a right to be paid. You walk over to him, your heart heavy. Sin-Leqi, you say, your voice gentle. We need to talk about what you owe. The conversation is quiet, painful. It is no longer a chat between two neighbors. It is a legal proceeding, conducted in the shadow of the King's Law. You are no longer just a tavern-keeper. You are a creditor, and you are beginning to realize that in Hammurabi's Babylon, that is a very powerful and very complicated thing to be. The difficult conversation with sin minus LEQI leaves a sour taste in your mouth. He has promised to pay, of course, but the promise feels as brittle as an unbaked pot. As you watch him leave, his shoulders even more stooped than usual, your wife comes to stand beside you. She has been watching the entire exchange from the back of the tavern, her arms crossed, her expression a mixture of pity and hard-nosed practicality. His debt is worth more than his kiln, she says, her voice quiet but firm. It's not a criticism, it's a statement of fact. We cannot give away beer. My husband, the grain is not free. You nod, staring out the door into the dusty street. I know. This tavern, she continues, stepping forward to wipe down the counterware sin minus LEQ I said, is our life. It is my life as much as it is yours. Her words hang in the air, simple, direct, and profoundly true. And they lead you, and us, to one of the most surprisingly modern and historically significant aspects of your world. This is our main historical point for the chapter under the Code of Hammurabi. A married woman had significant, unlegally protected economic rights. Your wife is not your property. In the eyes of the law, she is, in many ways, your business partner. You look at her, really look at her. She is not just the woman who shares your bed and bears your children. She is the co-manager of this establishment. She knows the brewing process as well as you do. Her palate is just as sharp at detecting a souring batch. She is often better haggling with the tough nails merchants who supply your dates and spices. The success of this tavern is built on her labor and her skill, a fact you've always known in your heart but have rarely acknowledged aloud. And the king's law recognizes this reality. When you married, her father gave her a dowry, a collection of silver, perhaps some furniture, fine linens, or even a servant. According to the code, this dowry, the SRTUM, belongs to her. It is not yours. You can use it. You can invest it in the business and you have, but you can never sell it. If you were to divorce her, you would have to pay it all back. If you die, the dowry belongs to her and your children, not to your brothers or other relatives. It is her personal property, legally protected by the stone in the temple courtyard. This brings us to a specific and fascinating detail buried within the code's dense regulations, the legal status of a business jointly run by a husband and wife. While the husband was the public head of the family, the law implicitly recognized the wife's stake. Some marriage contracts from this period even specify the wife's share in the family business or state that she is entitled to a portion of the profits. Your tavern isn't just your tavern. Legally and practically, it's a joint venture. Her quiet reminder, it is my life as much as it is yours, is not an emotional plea. It's a statement of her legal and economic standing. This reality fuels one of the most important ongoing revisions in the study of ancient history, the traditional view of history, often written by men and focusing on male-dominated arenas like politics and warfare, has historically rendered women invisible or relegated them to the domestic sphere. The story of Mesopotamia was the story of kings, priests, and soldiers. However, a new generation of historians, many of them women, have challenged this narrative by focusing on the unimportant documents, marriage contracts, dowry lists, lawsuits over inheritance, business receipts. They have pieced together a radically different picture. They argue that women, while excluded from formal political power, were integral to the economic life of the society. They were weavers, brewers, priestess, landlords, and creditors. The Code of Hammurabi, in this light, is not just a document about what men did. It's one of our richest sources for understanding the complex and varied lives of women. The debate is no longer if women had a role in the economy, but how much power and autonomy that role really gave them. Was your wife a true, equal partner, or was her power still fundamentally limited by a patriarchal system that gave you the final say? The law was a double-edged sword for women. While it gave your wife rights over her dowry, it also prescribed brutal punishments for women accused of adultery or gad-about-ing. Law 143, for example, states that if a woman has disgraced her husband, she could be thrown into the water. The code both empowered and controlled women, reflecting the complex and often contradictory attitudes of the society that created it. Your wife finishes wiping the counter and turns to face you. Tomorrow, she says, you will go to the grain merchant. We need more barley. Take the silver ring the priestess gave us. It will cover the cost, and this time, do not let him change you on the weight. She is not asking. She is instructing. She is making an executive decision about the management of their shared business, using capital that is, in a sense, hers. You nod. Yes, my wife. In that simple exchange, the true power dynamic of your household is laid bare. You may be the man who faces the world, but she is the one who makes sure the foundation beneath your feet is solid. And in Hammurabi's Babylon, that foundation is built not just on love or custom, but on the unyielding power of the law. The next morning, you follow your wife's instructions. You leave her in charge of the tavern, a task you have no doubt she will handle with her usual quiet competence. In a small leather pouch, you carry the silver ring the priestess gave you, along with a few other small pieces of silver. Your destination is the shop of a man named Ibbi-Sin, one of the city's major grain merchants, a man whose wealth is built on the endless, universal need for barley. His shop is not a simple stall. It's a large, walled compound near the river where barges unload their cargo. The air is thick with the dust of 100 transactions, and the smell of grain, dirt, and animal sweat. Ibbi-Sin sits in the shade of a linen awning, a large, imposing man with shrewd eyes and a ledger of clay tablets at his side. He is not a man you can haggle with easily. This transaction is the central historical point of your morning. You are about to engage with the highly regulated, state-controlled economy of Babylon. The Code of Hammurabi didn't just set laws for crime. It set the rules for commerce. It established official weights and measures, fixed prices for certain commodities, and set the wages for laborers. The king's goal was to create a stable, predictable economy, to prevent runaway inflation and ensure that the basic building blocks of society, food and labor, were accessible at a fair price. You are about to see how that top-down control plays out on the ground. I need a GUR of barley, you say, getting straight to the point. A GUR is a large unit of volume, roughly 300 liters. It's a significant purchase. Ibbi-Sin looks you up and down, his eyes lingering on your modest clothes. The price is fixed by the king's stole, he says, his voice flat. 1 shekel of silver for each GUR. He is telling you there is no room for negotiation on the price. That is the law. You nod, as the king commands. You open your pouch and lay out your silver. Ibbi-Sin's eyes flick to the priestess's ring. He recognizes quality. His demeanor softens, almost imperceptibly. He shouts an order to his laborers, who go to a massive pile of barley and begin to fill woven sacks. While they work, the merchant makes a note on a fresh clay tablet, documenting the sale. This is a crucial part of the process. In Babylon, a verbal agreement was not enough. For any significant transaction, a written contract was required. And this brings us to a wonderfully specific detail of this world: the silver itself. The shekel is not a coin. Coins have not been invented yet. Your money is chunks of raw silver of varying shapes and sizes. This is why a merchant always had a balance scale at his side. Every single transaction had to be weighed. Ibbi-Sin pulls out his bronze scale, a delicate instrument with 2 pans hanging from a central beam. He places a polished tone weight, a certified 1 shekel weight from the temple, in one pan. Then, you place your silver pieces in the other until the beam is perfectly balanced. It is a slow, meticulous, and deeply personal process. The entire economy runs on this constant, ritualistic act of weighing. But how well did this system of price controls and fixed measures actually work? This is the heart of a major debate among economic historians of the ancient world. One view is that Hammurabi's economic regulations were a resounding success. They created a period of unprecedented economic stability. fostered trade, and protected the poor from price gouging by standardizing weights, measures, and prices. The code reduced disputes and made commerce more efficient. In this light, the system was a brilliant example of early state interventionism, creating a thriving and relatively fair marketplace. The opposing view, however, argues that this system created a huge black market. Anytime a government fixes prices below their natural market value, shortages and illegal trading are inevitable. These historians argue that while the official price of barley was 1 shekel per gur, the actual street price likely fluctuated wildly depending on the harvest. They believe that a whole shadow economy existed alongside the official one, where merchants like IBBI- would trade illegally, off the books, at higher prices. The contracts and receipts we find, they argue, might just be the official story, a legal fiction created to satisfy the palace bureaucrats, while the real, dynamic, and often illegal business happened in the back alleys. Was the Babylonian economy a model of orderly state control, or was it a chaotic dance between official regulation and a thriving black market? The ledgers only tell one side of the story. The laborers bring the 2 heavy sacks of barley and place them before you. Now comes the most important moment of the transaction. IBBI-Sin's assistant brings out another, much larger balance scale. They heave one of the sacks onto one side of the scale. On the other, they place a series of large, certified stone weights that add up to the official weight of a gur of barley. You watch the beam like a hawk. This is where a dishonest merchant could cheat you. A slightly inaccurate scale, a cleverly disguised lighter weight, it could cost you a significant amount of grain. You are watching for the same thing your wife warned you about. But today, under the watchful eye of the king's law, everything seems to be in order. The beam balances. The measure is true. The transaction is complete. You have traded your silver for barley at the king's price, using the king's measures. Under the king's law, you feel a strange sense of relief, but also of being trapped. The system where it was fair, but it was also rigid. There was no room for a good deal. No reward for shrewd negotiation. There was only the law. You arrange for the sacks to be delivered to your tavern, your mind already calculating how many beakers of beer you'll have to sell to turn this mountain of grain back into a few small pieces of silver. Your barley is delivered, and the rhythms of the tavern resume. The transaction with the merchant IBBI-Sin, with its rigid weights and fixed prices, reinforces your sense of living in a new, highly regulated world. You feel less like an independent craftsman and more like a licensed operator, a cog in the great machine of the Babylonian state. This feeling is about to be amplified. A few days later, a man you don't know enters your tavern. He is not a laborer or a local merchant. He is dressed in the dusty robes of a long-distance traveler, and he is clearly agitated. He introduces himself as a caravan trader from the city of Lapham to the south. He is here to meet a man, another merchant, to finalize the payment for a shipment of fine wool. The problem is, the other merchant is now denying the terms of the deal. We agreed on 10 shekels of silver, the traveler says, his voice rising in frustration. Now he claims we only agreed on 8. He is a thief. The other man, a local textile producer you vaguely recognize, shakes his head. There was no talk of 10 shekels. The wool was of poor quality. 8 shekels is a generous price. The argument escalates, their voices filling your small tavern. In the old days, you might have told them to take their dispute outside. But now, you are a man who knows the law. You see where this is heading. This isn't just an argument. It's a potential legal case. This is the main historical point of the moment. The Code of Hammurabi places an enormous emphasis on documentary evidence and formal witnesses. The king's justice system was designed to move beyond the he said arguments of the past. It demanded proof, a contract, a receipt, a witness. These were the pillars of a successful legal claim. Did you have a tablet? You ask, interrupting their shouting match. A written contract. The traveler from Lapham scoffs. We made the deal in good faith. All a handshake, his word against mine. The local merchant smirks. Exactly. his word against mine. He knows the law better than the traveler does. He knows that without a tablet, the traveler's claim is weak. This is where the law becomes incredibly specific, and its brilliance, or perhaps its tyranny, is revealed. Law 7 of the Code states, if any one buy from the son or the slave of another man, without witnesses or a contract, silver or gold, a male or female slave, an ox or a sheep, an ass or anything whatever, or if he take it in charge, he is considered a thief and shall be put to death. This is an astonishingly harsh law. It's not just about resolving a dispute. It's about forcing a complete change in commercial behavior. The state is essentially outlawing informal transactions. It is commanding its citizens to document everything, to use witnesses, to create a clear paper trail for every single significant exchange. Why? Because a society with clear contracts is a society with fewer disputes, and a society with fewer disputes is more stable, more orderly, and easier to tax. You are witnessing the birth of bureaucracy, enforced by the threat of capital punishment. This obsession with witnesses raises a fascinating historical question, and our debate for the chapter. What constituted a good witness in a Babylonian court? Was any person who saw or heard the transaction acceptable? The evidence suggests it was far more complicated. The ideal witnesses were men of good standing in the community, property owners, minor officials, priests. Their word carried more weight. The testimony of a man's own wife or children was often considered biased less reliable, and the testimony of a slave was almost always inadmissible unless it was obtained under torture, a practice the Babylonians believed was necessary to ensure a slave was telling the truth against their master's interests. So, the legal system, while demanding witnesses, was not a system of equals. The truth was a weighted average, heavily skewed in favor of the powerful and the propertied. The smirking local merchant in your tavern understands this, even if the traveler could produce a witness. If that witness was just another dusty caravan driver with no standing in your city, their testimony might be deemed worthless against his own, a respected local businessman. The two men continue to argue, but the energy has gone out of it. The man from Laws A knows he is beaten. He has no tablet. He has no witnesses of high status. He has only his word. And in the new Babylon, a man's word alone is worth nothing. He eventually accepts the 8 shekels of silver, his face a mask of bitter defeat. He drains his beer, casts a hateful glare at the local merchant, and storms out of your tavern. You watch him go, feeling a profound sense of unease. Justice, in this case, had nothing to do with what was true. It had everything to do with what could be proven. The law had not necessarily found the truth. It had simply resolved the dispute in the most efficient way possible, in favor of the man who better understood the new rules of the game. You look around your tavern. You think of your own dealings. The barley from IBBI minus sin, documented on a clay tablet. Your agreement with sin minus L, EQI about his debt, purely verbal. A chill runs down your spine. You realize with dawning horror that you're informal. Neighborly kindness to the sad potter has left you completely exposed. If he were to deny his debt, it would be your word against his. You have no tablet. You have no witnesses. In the eyes of the law, the debt does not exist. The fear doesn't go away. It has become a part of the flavor of your days, a bitter undertone to the sweets into your mouth. You find yourself being meticulously honest, obsessively fair. You use a certified measure for every beaker of beer. You give a little extra grain back in change. You have become a model of commercial piety, not out of virtue, but out of terror. You try to make yourself a target to small to hit. Knife, however, has a rhythm that can lull even the most anxious soul into a state of fragile calm. Weeks go by without incident. The execution of IOU minus Bonnie becomes a grim memory, and the legal dramas of your neighbors fade. Your tavern is doing well. The priestess has not returned, but other, less complicated customers have taken her place. You are starting to feel like you might just survive this new world of stone minus carved laws. And that is when your enemy chooses to strut. He is another tavern minus keeper from across the city square named Nabu minus Nasir. He is a man with a perpetually sour expression, as if he's been drinking his own worst batches. You know he is jealous. His location is not as good as yours. His brew is not as clean, and his customers have been slowly trickling over to your establishment. You have seen him watching your tavern from a distance, his eyes full of a familiar, ugly envy. One afternoon, he walks in. He is not alone. He is flanked by two men you recognize as his laziest customers. Men who would praise sewage if it were offered to them for free. Nabu-Nasir is not here for a drink. He is here for war. He strides to the center of your tavern, and the few patrons you have fall silent, sensing the tension. This is the moment you learn how the machine of justice truly starts. It does not always begin with a crime. Sometimes, it begins with a grudge. This is our central historical point, the Babylonian legal system, for all its divine authority, was still initiated by ordinary, flawed human beings. It could be set in motion by a genuine grievance, but it could also be weaponized by envy, greed, or personal hatred. The courts were an arena, and any citizen could, in theory, drag another into it. I have come to make a charge in the name of the king, Nabu-Nasir proclaims, his voice loud and theatrical for the benefit of the audience. He is performing his role as the concerned citizen. You stand behind your counter, your hands gripping the edge. What is your charge? Nabu-Nasir. He holds up his primary piece of evidence. It's a clay beaker, half minus full of what looks like your beer. This is our wonderfully strange detail for the day a cup of allegedly bad beer is about to become exhibit A in a capital case. Your beer, he declares. It is sour. It is unfit for the sons of Babylon. It is an offense to the gods and a violation of the king's law. His two companions nod vigorously, their faces masks of performative disgust. You stare at the beaker. It's impossible. You tasted that batch this morning. It was perfect. My beer is fresh. You say, your voice tight. You are lying. Am I? Nabu-Nasir sneers. I have witnesses, and I have the proof right here. I am taking this matter to the judge. I am formally accusing you. And just like that, it has happened. The thing you have been dreading. An official accusation has been made. It is no longer a tavern dispute. It is a legal matter, a state matter. This very situation and accusation based on subjective evidence like taste is something legal historians have puzzled over for years. How did a Babylonian judge handle a case like this? This is our academic debate. We know the code was obsessed with proof, with witnesses and tablets. But what happened when the proof itself was debatable? One theory is that the judges relied on the weight of testimony. If Nabu-Nasir and his two witnesses all swore before the gods on the temple steps that the beer was sour, the judge might be forced to believe them, regardless of your protests. In this view, justice could be a matter of numbers. The side with more witnesses won. This would make the system vulnerable to conspiracies, where a group could agree to lie to destroy a rival. Another theory suggests that the judges, being practical men, likely employed more investigative methods. They might have sent an official to your tavern to sample the beer themselves. They might have considered the reputations of both the accuser and the accused. Was Nabu-Nasir known for being a troublemaker? Were you known for being an honest brewer? This view sees the judges as having more latitude and investigative authority than a strict reading of the code might suggest. They were not just referees counting witnesses. They were detectives trying to find a version of the truth. The question of how much judicial discretion existed is key to understanding whether the system was a rigid, formulaic machine or a more flexible, human institution. Your argument with Nabu-Nasir is cut short by the arrival of a redam, an officer of the court. Nabu-Nasir has clearly planned this. The officer is not here to arrest you. Not yet. He is here to serve a summons. He produces a small, damp clay tablet and hands it to you. On it are etched a few lines of cuneiform. You can trade them, but you know what they say. They say that you, a tavern-minus keeper, have been accused of a crime against the king's law, and you are hereby ordered to appear before a judge on the third day from now. You hold the tablet in your hand. It feels impossibly heavy. It is the weight of the entire state. The envy of a bitter man has successfully activated the terrifying machinery of the law. You are no longer a tavern-keeper. You are a defendant, and you have 2 days to figure out how to save your life. A clay tablet sits on your counter like a death sentence. The 2 days the summons gives you feel both impossibly long and terrifyingly short. Sleep offers no escape. Your dreams are filled with the image of Il, you minus Bunny's sinking second Nabu minus Nasir's sneering face. Your wife tries to comfort you, but a shared fear hangs between you, a silence thick with unspoken terror. On the 3rd day, you rise before the sun. You do not wash or eat. You dress in the cleanest tunic you own, a futile gesture of respectability. Your wife presses your hand at the door, her eyes wide with fear. You walk out into the cool dawn and make your way to the temple complex. You are not going to the grand temple of Marduk this time, but to a smaller, less imposing building at its side. This is the court of the city judges. The chamber is a long, rectangular hall with a high ceiling supported by thick plaster columns. The light is dim, filtering in from high windows. The air is cool and smells of old clay and incense. There are no grand mahogany benches or elevated platforms. The judge, a stern minus-faced man in the robes of a senior priest, sits on a simple but finely carved wooden chair at the far end of the room. This is the main historical point of the scene. Babylonian justice was not separate from religion. The judges were often priests, and the courthouse was often within the temple precinct. The law was seen as a divine institution, and a courtroom was a sacred space. To lie here was not just to break the king's law, it was to commit blasphemy. You see Nabu minus Nasir already there, standing with his 2 witnesses. Looking confident and smug, you are instructed to stand before the judge. There is no jury of your peers. There is only the judge, who represents the authority of both the gods and the king. He is the investigator, the prosecutor, and the final arbiter, all rolled into one. The judge looks down at a larger clay tablet honest, and before him a copy of the formal accusation. His clerk reads the charge aloud, his voice echoing slightly in the quiet hall. Nabu minus Nasir, son of a baker, accuses this man, tavern-keeper, of selling beer that is sour and of a quality below the standard of the king's law, thereby cheating his customers and the gods. The judge then looks at you. His eyes are piercing, emotional, says, "What is your plea?" "I am innocent, my lord judge," you say, your voice cracking slightly. "My beer is good. This man is my rival. He lies out of envy." This is where the Babylonian legal process shows its unique character. It's not a back and forth between 2 lawyers. It is an inquiry conducted by the judge. He begins by questioning your accuser. "Nabu minus Nasir, you have brought this charge. Present your proof." Nabu minus Nasir steps forward and places his beaker of allegedly sour beer on a small table before the judge. He then brings forth his 2 witnesses. This is a very specific and quirky detail of the process, the swearing of the oath. Before they can testify, each witness must place their hand upon a divine symbol, perhaps a small statue of the god Shamash or a sacred emblem brought from the temple, and swear to speak the truth. "I swear by the great god Shamash and Marduk that the beer I drank from this man's tavern was sour and unfit for consumption." The oath is the cornerstone of the entire system. To swear, a false oath was considered a terrible sin, one that would bring divine retribution upon the liar and his family for generations. The 2 witnesses swear their oaths and give their testimony. They are, of course, lying, but they do it convincingly. They describe the beer in detail, how it tasted like vinegar, how it soured their stomachs. It is a well-rehearsed performance. Throughout this, the judge listens, his face impassive. He is a professional, a man who has heard 1,000 stories, 1,000 accusations. And this is where we encounter the central academic debate about these judges. What was their primary role? One view holds that they were essentially bureaucrats. Their job was to apply the laws of the code as written, with little room for interpretation. If the law said a certain number of witnesses were required, and the accuser produced them, the judge's hands were tied. He was an administrator of a rigid legal machine. However, A more recent and popular view sees Babylonian judges as having far more agency. By studying the records of actual court cases, historians have found that judges often conducted their own investigation. They sent officials to survey property. They cross-examined witnesses intensely, and they looked for inconsistencies in testimony. They considered the character and reputation of the people involved. In this view, the judge was not just a bureaucrat. He was an investigator, empowered to seek the truth by any means necessary. The code was not an inflexible rulebook, but a guide, a statement of principles that the judge would then apply to the specific, messy realities of the case before him. Was the man sitting before you a rigid automaton of the law, or a shrewd seeker of truth? Your life depends on the answer. The judge finishes questioning the witnesses. He dismisses them and turns his piercing gaze back to you. You have heard the testimony of 3 men who have sworn an oath before the gods. They say your beer is sour. You say it is good. You have no contract to prove its quality. You have only your word against their 3 oaths. He pauses, and the silence in the hall is absolute. The law is clear about the penalty for your alleged crime, but the truth of the matter is not. The words of men are fallible. He leans forward slightly. Therefore, I will seek a witness whose word is not. You feel a surge of hope. He is not convinced by their lies. He is going to investigate further. I need a witness of unimpeachable authority. The judge continues, a witness who cannot lie. And then he delivers the words that extinguish your hope and replace it with a cold, liquid terror. Summon the river god. The judge's words, summon the river god, land like stones in the silent courtroom. For a moment, you don't understand. Your mind struggles to connect the sour beer, the sneering face of your rival, and this sudden, terrifying implication. Then, the full meaning crashes down on you. This is not going to be a simple acquittal. The judge, faced with conflicting testimony, has chosen the path of divine arbitration. He has invoked the ordeal. Nebuchadnezzar's smug expression falters for the first time. A flicker of fear appears in his eyes. He thought this would be a simple case of his war against yours, a case he could win with perjured testimony. He did not anticipate that his own life would be placed on the line as well. The law of the river ordeal, as you know, is a double-edged sword that cuts down the false accuser as surely as it does the guilty. But your relief is fleeting, replaced by the all-consuming dread of the ordeal itself. You will not be executed based on Nebuchadnezzar's lies, but you could still easily die. Your fate now rests not on human reason, but on the capricious currents of the Euphrates. The judge dismisses the court. The ordeal is set for the following morning at dawn. You walk out of the temple complex in a daze. The bustling city seems distant and unreal. All you can see is the murky, foul water of the river. How can you survive this? How can you prove your innocence to a god who communicates in currents and eddies? This is your new, desperate quest, and it is our main historical point for the chapter in a legal system that includes trial by ordeal. Winning your case takes on a whole new meaning. It's no longer about finding evidence or swaying a judge. It's about finding a way to survive a potentially lethal test. Your focus shifts from legal strategy to survival strategy. You return to your tavern, and, for the first time, you tell your wife everything. The full, terrifying truth of the situation. Her face drains of color, but she does not panic. Her practicality, the same hardness that chided you about sin minus elite UI's dead, now becomes your greatest asset. The river god is a god, she says, her voice slow and intense. And gods, like men, can be influenced. They respond to piety, to offerings, and to oaths. We cannot fight the river, but perhaps we can persuade it. Her words spark a desperate idea. You cannot prove the beer was good, but maybe you can find someone whose own piety and reputation are so great that the river god would hesitate to take them. You need a character witness, not for the judge, but for the god himself. This brings us to a wonderfully specific, though speculative, detail about ancient psychology. In a world where the gods were believed to intervene directly in human affairs, public reputation and perceived piety were not just social assets. They were a form of spiritual armor. A person known for their honesty and their devotion to the gods was believed to be under divine protection. To falsely accuse such a person was considered not just a crime, but a foolish and dangerous provocation of the gods. You are about to test that theory. The decision to seek her out is born of pure desperation. You offended her. You barred her from your tavern. But you did so in the name of the law. You can only pray she is a woman who values law above ego. You go to the cloister near the temple, a place you have never dared to approach before. You beg the gods to take a message to her. You wait for what feels like an eternity. Finally, you are led into a quiet, sun-dappled courtyard. She is there, sitting by a small fountain. You fall to your knees. You don't have time for eloquence. You tell her the entire story, your voice cracking with fear and desperation. You tell her about Nabu-Desia's lies, the judge's verdict, and the impending ordeal. You do not ask her to lie for you. You ask her for something far more important. My lady, you finish, your forehead nearly touching the ground. I know I cannot ask you to be my witness in the court of men. That tomorrow, at the river bank, I beg you, simply be there. Let the god of the river see that you, his holy servant, do not believe me to be a cheat and a liar. This whole scenario is, of course, at the heart of a great historical unknown. This is our academic debate. We have the laws of the ordeal carved in stone, but we have very few first-hand accounts of how people prepared for them. Did they simply pray? Did they make offerings? Or did they engage in desperate, last-minute strategies like this? Did they try to game the system by appealing to the complex social and religious hierarchies of their world? Some historians believe the process was a fatalistic and purely religious one. Others suspect that it was surrounded by a whole ecosystem of informal strategies, rituals, and desperate legal maneuvering that has been lost to time. Your desperate plea to the priestess is a plausible reconstruction of how a person might have tried to tip the divine scales in their favor. The priestess is silent for a long time. The only sound is the gentle splashing of the fountain. You are offering her nothing but a chance to associate herself with a man who is about to undergo a capital ordeal. If you drown, her judgment will be called into question. You barred me from your tavern, she says finally, her voice cool. I did, you whisper, to obey the law of the king, which you serve. She looks at you, her eyes unreadable. The river is a harsh judge, tavern-keeper. I am an innocent man, you say. She stands up. Be at the river at dawn, she says. The god of justice sees all. She turns and walks away, leaving you with no clear answer, only a sliver of terrifying, fragile hope. Dawn on the banks of the Euphrates is a symphony of muted colors. The sky is a soft gray, blushing with pink at the eastern horizon. The water is the color of slate, calm and mysterious. The air is cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and river reeds, but you feel none of its beauty. For you, this is not a sunrise. It is an execution ground. The priest begins the ritual. His voice, a low chant, rolls across the water, invoking the river god, asking him to render his sacred judgment. He recounts the accusation, the sour beer and the defense, the bitter rivalry. He asks the god to seize the guilty and absolve the innocent. The words are ancient, formulaic, and utterly terrifying. This is it, the final moment. This is our central historical point. The ordeal, in its rawest form, represents the complete surrender of human agency to the divine. It is the ultimate admission that the complexities of human truth are sometimes beyond the grasp of mortal minds. It is a moment of profound, terrifying faith in a system that operates beyond your control. The priest finishes his chant and looks at you. It is time. You must enter the water. You take a breath and step forward. And then, a voice, clear and authoritative, cuts through the morning stillness. Stop. She does not look at you or your accuser. She addresses the priest officiating the ordeal. The temple of Shamash has an interest in this matter, she says, her voice carrying an authority that makes the local priest visibly nervous. A judicial decision should not be sought from the river god until all human avenues for discovering the truth have been exhausted. Her intervention is breathtaking in its audacity. She is not questioning the validity of the river ordeal itself. She is questioning its timing. She is challenging the judge's decision to resort to it so quickly, framing it as a lazy shortcut. This is an incredibly nuanced legal and religious argument, and this specific, imagined moment speaks to a deeper historical debate. Was the legal system of Hammurabi static, or did it evolve? The code is written as if it is timeless and absolute, but was it? Many legal historians argue that any living legal system is in constant conversation with itself. They believe that priests, judges, and even ordinary citizens were likely engaged in a continuous process of interpreting, refining, and even challenging the application of the code. The priestess's intervention is an example of this. She is, in essence, creating a new legal precedent that the ordeal should be a last resort, not a first one. She is pushing back against the system from within the system itself. Whether this kind of internal critique was common or exceptionally rare is something scholars can only speculate on. The priestess then turns her gaze to Nabu-Nasir. "You have brought a charge against this man," she says, her voice like ice. "You claim his beer was sour. Yet, I myself have drunk the beer from his tavern, and found it to be good. I, a consecrated servant of Shemosh, will swear an oath to this fact. Will you, Nabu-Nasir, maintain your accusation, now that you will be swearing your oath not just against a tavern-keeper, but against a priestess of the sun god? The threat is unspoken but crystal clear. To lie is a sin. To lie against a priestess, in a matter where she has now claimed divine interest, is a suicidal act of blasphemy. The gods would surely know, and the river would surely take him." Nabu-Nasir collapses. He falls to his knees in the dirt, his face ashen. All the bluster, all the venom, drains out of him. I was mistaken," he stammers. "The beer. Perhaps it was a different batch. I withdraw the accusation. It's over." Just like that. The priestess has not acted as your witness in the traditional sense. She has done something far more powerful. She has transformed the legal and religious calculus of the entire situation, making it impossible for your accuser's lie to survive. The officiating priest, looking immensely relieved to be out of the middle of this high-level dispute, declares the matter closed. The accusation is withdrawn. There will be no ordeal. He then turns to Nabu-Nasir. "However," he says, his voice now hard, "you have brought a false charge and invoked the sacred name of the gods in vain. For this, you will pay a fine of 10 shekels of silver to the temple, and you will deliver 100 jars of good beer to the palace of the king, as penance for your insult to his justice. The judgment is swift, practical, and devastating for your rival. It will likely ruin him. Justice has been served, not by the river, but by a masterful manipulation of the very system that was supposed to destroy you." You look at the priestess. She gives you a single, brief nod, then turns and walks away. Her point made, her authority absolute. You are safe, you are alive, and you have just witnessed the awesome, unpredictable power of the law in its fullest expression. You walk away from the riverbed, your legs unsteady, your mind a whirlwind of relief and disbelief. The morning sun, now fully risen, feels warmer, more benevolent. The world, which had seemed a landscape of traps and threats, once again looks like a place where you might be able to live and work. You are not the same person who walked to the river at dawn. You have been to the edge of the abyss and been pulled back by the most unlikely of allies. You return to your tavern. Your wife sees you approaching, and her face, which had been a mask of stoic dread, breaks into a sob of pure, unadulterated relief. She runs to you, and you hold each other in the doorway of your establishment. The silent, powerful acknowledgement of the bullet you have just dodged. The few regulars who followed you to the river and back now pat you on the shoulder, their faces full of a newfound respect. You are no longer just the man who serves them beer. You are the man who faced down a false accuser and won. In the days and weeks that follow, your life settles into a new kind of normal. This is the final and most enduring point of our story. The Code of Hammurabi, for all its terror, did achieve its primary goal. It created order. Your world is now fundamentally different from the one you inhabited before the stele was erected. The law is no longer a distant rumor. It is a permanent, invisible resident in your tavern. You see the effects everywhere. Nabu minus sincere. Your rival is a broken man. The fine and the penance have ruined you. His tavern closes down within a month. Another casualty of a law who tried to weaponize E. His failure is a stark and public lesson to others who might consider using the courts to settle a personal vendetta. Your own business practices are forever changed. You now insist on a witness for every significant transaction. When you deal with sin minus LEQI, the sad porter, you bring your wife to listen to his promises of payment, so that you have a witness, just in case. When you buy grain from the merchant, IBBI minus sin, you both make a record on a clay tablet, and you each keep a copy. The casual, handshake minus based society of your youth is gone, replaced by a world of contracts and documentation. It is less trusting, but it is also less ambiguous. And you are more careful than ever about the quality of your beer. You taste every batch with a new intensity, a new focus. You are not just checking for flavor, you are checking for your life. The memory of the river ordeal has made you the most honest brewer in Babylon. Ironically, the law, which almost killed you, has made you a better businessman. This new, ordered world is the subject of our final historical debate. Was the society created by Hammurabi's code a better society? Was it a good place to live? One perspective argues, yes, it was a society where a person was, in theory, protected from the whims of the powerful. A society where contracts were enforced, where commerce could flourish under a predictable set of rules, and where even a humble tavern-keeper had recourse against a false accuser. It was a society that valued order over chaos, and for many, that order provided a welcome stability in a harsh and unpredictable world. It was a step, however brutal, towards the rule of law. The other perspective argues that this order came at a terrible price. It was a society governed by fear. Fear of the state, fear of your neighbors, fear of the river, fear of a law that could take your son for your mistake or demand your life for an accusation you couldn't disprove. The social trust that had once bound communities together was replaced by a system of surveillance and suspicion. It was a society where the law was oftener to love the powerful, reinforcing a rigid social hierarchy. It was safe, perhaps, but it was not free. You stand behind your counter, pouring a beaker of beer for a customer. The tavern is full, the chatter is lively, the smell of the mash is sweet. From the outside, everything looks the same as it did before the great stone was erected. But you know it is different. You know that you are living within a delicate, dangerous, and brilliantly constructed machine. You have felt its gears grind against you, and you have been saved by one of its most powerful operators. You have learned that the law is not just a set of rules. It is a living thing. It can be a weapon, a shield, a trap, or a refuge. You have survived it, and as you hand the fresh, honest beer to your customer, you do so with the quiet, weary wisdom of a man who understands that in the new Babylon of King Hammurabi, justice is a very complicated brew. And so, the hum of your tavern begins to soften, the voices of the patrons blending into a gentle murmur, the sharp edges of the law, the fear of the judge and the river, all dissolve into the warm, comfortable haze of a day's work done. The weight of the world lifts from your shoulders, replaced by the gentle pull of sleep. You are no longer in ancient Babylon, with its clay tablets on its terrifying justice. You are in your own quiet space, your own safe harbor. The story is over, and the path into your own dreams is clear. A path where all debts are forgiven and every cup is filled with peace. Let the silence be your closing time, a soft and welcome end to the journey. The end of the article. Good night.